Hi everyone, this is a brief review of some of the key concepts from Module 2. When I was grading the video analysis, I noticed that we could use some review on this. This will be important moving forward, and I think if you review this, this will be helpful for you. I apologize, I tried to record a super cute video last night with my dogs and everything, doing aided and unaided communication, and the dogs were cooperating, but the video client wasn't. So now you get a pretty generic um, video walkthrough of the concept. So in the first video we see, she's asking, "What is this?" and pointing to the box of Cheerios on the ground. Those are two separate communication acts. The first communication act is verbal. She's saying, "What is this?" Um, and it is unaided. Um, this might be a bit of an oversimplification, but you can look at the difference between aided and unaided as essentially the use of props. If she was using a phone to call somebody and say, like, "Hey, what's this box of Cheerios on the ground?" Or if she was using an AAC board to ask her question, or a megaphone to speak across a room and ask, "What is this box of Cheerios?" All of those would be aided communication, but she's not really using any props. Same thing with the pointing. That's also unaided communication. If she had had a laser pointer or one of those chalkboard pointers, that would have been an aided gesture. But in this case, it's also unaided. Even though she's using her voice and her pointing to kind of like combine and form um, one big communication act, it's not like you wouldn't consider the pointing and the words to be aiding each other. Again, the aiding is more like the use of props. Um, looking at the second video, we have two people talking. Looks like it's the WebEx client, a webcam uh, call, I suppose. So they're talking, that's one communication act. Pointing at a book, that's another communication act. Nodding, and they're about to wave. Most of you picked up on the different communication acts in that video. But here's where it tricked you. All of that took place over the WebEx client, so all of that was aided communication. They wouldn't have been able to communicate without the use of their webcams and their computers. Um, so all of that was aided communication. All right, let's talk briefly about the difference between symbolic and non-symbolic communication. So this it really draws back to another concept that we did during the week 2 module, one of the quizzes, where we ranked different, I guess, from most concrete to most abstract. And the most concrete would be, holding up an item. Here's a stapler. Whereas the most abstract might be writing the word stapler on a piece of paper. Um, that really, I guess, dives at the heart of symbolic and non-symbolic too, because holding up a stapler, that's not symbolic, whereas writing the word stapler on a piece of paper, that is symbolic. Symbolic is, I guess, communication that people have to agree on the meaning of, which implies it has to be either taught or learned for it to be symbolic communication. The words I'm using now, at some point in your life, you learned these words, and that's how we're communicating. We both agree on what I'm talking about when I say the word stapler. Um, if if I was holding up my hands in protest, like, no, I don't want that, that would be closer to the non-symbolic end of the spectrum, because there's no deciphering, there's no interpretation to be done. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty universal. I think you could go to anybody, regardless of which language they spoke, and hold up your hands in protest, and they would know what you're talking about, essentially. Here's why this is important. When we're working with students with severe disabilities, symbolic communication, um, whether it's words or writing or sign language, symbolic communication needs to be taught explicitly if they haven't already learned it at some point down the road. Um, because some people pick up on symbolic communication quicker than others. Some people learn language easier than others. But if you're going to use symbols and symbolic communication, you need to be sure that the person you're communicating with understands you. Whereas non-symbolic communication is it's more straightforward. If if one of your students was trying to give you something, you held up your hands like no, no, and shook your head, um, that would be less symbolic, and I think you would get your point across pretty clearly. Um, Some of you brought up good points in the first video where she's pointing at the box of Cheerios. The pointing, it could be non-symbolic. I saw cases for that, arguing that it was just used to draw attention to the box on the floor. Other people argued that it was symbolic. It's essentially a gesture that says, what is this? Um, in truth, the symbolic to non-symbolic, I'd consider it more of a spectrum, and a pointing gesture like that would probably be somewhere in the middle. Um, that's not an easy answer. Uh, it leaves it still kind of as an abstract concept for you to try to figure out, like, well, is wave symbolic? Is pointing symbolic? Um, but when you think about stuff like that, I do want you to think about the purpose behind it. The purpose is to ensure that you're making the communication easier for the students that you work with, and the purpose is also to evaluate the communication that you're teaching and making sure that if it's symbolic, if it's appropriately symbolic, that you're providing an appropriate amount of instruction to go with that. If you want to re-review some of these concepts, you can go to the week 2 lecture. I think it was all of this discussion was in like the first 3 minutes of the first lecture video right up here. If you still have questions after this video and after reviewing some of that, as always, feel free to email either myself or Dr. Betts. Good luck with this concept.